What if the woman America hails as Hollywood's golden girl has been presenting a carefully polished story that isn't true? What if the man she publicly accused, humiliated, and quietly erased wasn't the villain at all, but the real target? Blake Lively built her empire on charm, feminism, and meticulously crafted narratives, yet behind the red carpets and curated interviews, a very different reality is coming into focus. One of manipulation, power plays, and an alleged smear campaign aimed at the man who helped bring her latest film to life. That man, Justin Baldoni, a devoted father and husband, was celebrated for championing women's voices until Blake seemingly decided his voice didn't belong. What you're about to uncover has never been fully revealed. This isn't gossip. It's a story of calculated strategy, off-camera plans, and a narrative that may have been fabricated to destroy a man's career and seize control over his film. If you thought you knew the truth, think again, because once all the pieces come together, you may never view Blake Lively the same way. Baldoni wasn't just another actor moving into directing. He was held up as a model for modern masculinity. He spoke openly about emotions, loved his wife publicly, and was present for his children. On paper, a living TED Talk on how to be a better man. Social media celebrated him. Clips of his thoughts on vulnerability and masculinity went viral, earning him praise as the ultimate feminist husband and an antidote to toxic Hollywood norms. Yet even Baldoni recognized the complexity behind the image. In a candid moment, he admitted something few men in his position would dare acknowledge. If a camera had been on during certain personal conversations with his wife, he could have been canceled in a heartbeat. That confession reveals a deeper tension between public persona and private reality, showing that the man cast as the villain in this saga may have been unjustly targeted all along. Beneath the surface lies a story of influence, image control, and a battle over truth, one that challenges everything the public has been told about Blake Lively and her carefully constructed Hollywood image. Justin Baldoni's image was built on honesty, maybe even too much honesty, because that raw authenticity, the very quality that made people trust him, would later be twisted against him. But Blake Lively wasn't seeking honesty. She was building a case. Justin had no idea that his most formidable opponent wasn't critics or the industry itself, but the woman standing beside him on the red carpet. It started subtly, a few hushed conversations, selective media leaks, and a narrative that took shape gradually and deliberately. Sources who came forward months before the lawsuit was dismissed alleged that Blake wasn't reacting to events, she was orchestrating them. Behind the scenes, her publicist, Leslie Sloan, allegedly provided major media outlets with carefully curated information. This wasn't simple PR spin. It was a calculated effort to recast Justin Baldoni from a celebrated feminist icon into a problematic figure, framing him as controlling, obstructive, and the wrong person to tell a woman-centered story. Once that idea took root, it spread rapidly. What makes this so alarming is that it wasn't a response to actual misconduct. There were no complaints about behavior on set, no legal violations, no genuine creative disputes. It was purely about power. Controlling the story, determining whose voice would dominate, and forcing Justin out of the creative space he occupied. Insiders say Blake sought full creative authority, not just as the lead actress, but as the visionary and storyteller, and Justin was inconveniently in her way. So when you want to take someone's place without asking, the strategy becomes clear. Make them appear unfit to hold it. Blake didn't attack publicly. She didn't need to. Instead, she let whispers and subtle framing do the damage. Multiple reports indicate that she quietly told others that Justin directing a film about female abuse was inappropriate, not because he had been abusive, not because there were complaints, but solely because he was a man. At first, it seemed like minor creative frustration, but as the whispers spread, the narrative shifted, recasting his role in the project as questionable and unnecessary. By the time the story reached the public, what had been a collaborative effort became a tale of exclusion and manipulation, illustrating how image, perception, and power can be weaponized to rewrite reality and marginalize those standing in the way of one person's control over a story, ultimately reshaping how the world would view both Justin Baldoni and the film itself. The story that's emerging around Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni paints a picture far darker than the polished public persona most of Hollywood sees. Allegedly, Blake didn't just quietly take the lead in the film she starred in. She engineered a systematic effort to control the narrative, positioning herself as the sole visionary while quietly pushing Justin out of the spotlight. According to sources, the language she used became political, charged, deliberately provocative, turning creative control into a moral battleground. She allegedly compared Justin's directing of the film to a broader social metaphor, likening a man guiding a female-centered story to stripping women of autonomy, saying, "A man directing this kind of film is no different than stripping a woman's right to choose." On the surface, it sounded dramatic, but the implications were devastating. A man who bought the rights, financed the project, and invited women into every step of production was being framed as a symbol of oppression simply for fulfilling his role. She allegedly targeted the intimacy scenes, insinuating that a man overseeing them was inherently wrong, never directly accusing Justin of misconduct, but implying it strongly enough that it shaped public perception. Meanwhile, Ryan Reynolds, Blake's husband, had produced and starred in films with far more graphic content, yet faced no scrutiny, revealing the core motivation: control. Justin wasn't just directing a film, he was telling a story that Blake wanted to own, and in her mind, that justified turning him into a political villain. Rumors swirled about his supposed controlling behavior, a toxic set, and Blake feeling unsafe, but the details were always vague, cloaked in carefully constructed language meant to isolate him and make audiences question his credibility. Then, an anonymous insider provided internal communications that revealed the depth of the alleged scheme. Blake's PR team reportedly began crafting a narrative before any drama had gone public, emphasizing that she never felt unsafe, that there was no harassment, and that the issue wasn't anything Justin had done. It was simply that he represented male authority in a story about female trauma. From there, the strategy escalated, portrayed Justin as indifferent, cold, disengaged, and disinterested, even when he had been systematically pushed out of the promotional process. The absence of Justin on press junkets, red carpets, and interviews wasn't voluntary. Insiders claim he was strategically erased by Blake's team to create a narrative of his disengagement, then portrayed as lazy or detached, while Blake appeared as the committed, passionate lead carrying the film. Behind the scenes, she allegedly rewrote parts of the script under the guise of author Colleen Hoover, despite no creative disputes between Hoover and Justin, further consolidating control and obscuring Justin's contribution. Each move was designed not only to secure credit but to manipulate public perception, making silence appear guilty, erasing evidence of his involvement, and positioning herself as the dominant force behind the story. Every calculated leak to media outlets, every strategic spin about the film's direction and production, and every carefully planted whisper about Justin's supposed failings was meant to strengthen her ownership over the project. This campaign allegedly transformed ordinary creative disagreements into moral and political arguments, framing Justin as an obstacle to female authorship and manipulating audiences into seeing him as a villain without ever accusing him outright of wrongdoing. Sources claim Blake's goal was not just acclaim but narrative monopoly, ensuring that the story, the press coverage, and ultimately the cultural perception of the film rested entirely under her control. By orchestrating these moves in secrecy, her team effectively rewrote the public-facing story while controlling every element of how Justin's role was perceived. The combination of media manipulation, selective leaks, and strategic sidelining created a chillingly efficient method for shaping reality, making it appear as though Justin's influence had been minimal while elevating Blake as the central creative force, allowing her to claim both ownership and moral authority over the project. In essence, the allegations depict a meticulously planned power play, one in which controlling the narrative, public perception, and credit became inseparable goals, transforming a collaborative film into a battlefield for reputation, authority, and dominance in Hollywood's public eye, leaving Justin Baldoni obscured and Blake Lively at the forefront of a story she allegedly rewrote to ensure her triumph. From the very beginning, Blake Lively was positioned front and center, even featured heavily in promotional material, a rare spotlight most authors never receive. Yet, insiders claim the alleged rewrites were her strategic moves, designed to shift the narrative without appearing as the disruptor.
Why?
Because she had her eyes set on the sequel. Sources close to the production say Blake was already planting the seeds for the next installment, implying that a woman's perspective was more authentic and that Justin Baldoni had presented the wrong version of the story. She wasn't just acting, she was quietly campaigning for his role, carefully reframing his leadership as problematic and his creative direction as tone-deaf, setting herself up as the natural heir to the franchise, not merely the star. What makes this strategy chilling is that her justification wasn't about creative vision. It was deeply personal. Reports claim she told associates that only a woman could properly tell a woman's story, implying any man, regardless of qualifications, was unfit to do so. It wasn't about justice or fairness. It was about replacement. And if that meant dismantling someone else's career to claim that position, in her mind, it was justified. When the lawsuit eventually concluded, most assumed the story had ended quietly. No trial, no headlines, just silence. But insiders stress that silence doesn't equate to justice or truth. Behind closed doors, conversations continue. Evidence is being organized, and those familiar with the case believe it is only a matter of time before Blake's carefully constructed version of events begins to unravel publicly. Because when you remove the headlines and PR spin, the reality appears starkly simple. There were no formal complaints lodged against Justin Baldoni, no evidence of harassment, and no toxic set environment. What existed, according to insiders, was a calculated power struggle, a coordinated campaign to remove him from his own film, not because of his actions, but because of the position Blake wanted to occupy. She didn't need to accuse him of wrongdoing. She only had to sow enough doubt and unease to make people question him, step aside, and let her step forward. And according to sources, it worked. But now, with leaked tips, contradictory timelines, and insiders breaking their silence, the tide may be turning. This story has grown beyond one actress and one director. It's become a cautionary tale about how narratives can be manipulated in Hollywood when someone is powerful, charming, and well-protected. The questions now linger. Will Blake secure her sequel? Will Justin ever have the chance to tell his side? Or will this remain another story quietly buried when the cameras turn off? The answer remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. If Blake Lively's ascent to creative dominance came at the cost of someone else's voice being silenced, this story is far from over. Was it a strategic smear campaign, or a case of clashing egos spiraling out of control? That's for the public to decide. As more details emerge and the next chapter unfolds, the full picture of influence, manipulation, and narrative control in Hollywood will only become clearer. For those following the story, subscribing and keeping notifications on will ensure they see each development as it happens, revealing the complex power dynamics that shape what audiences ultimately believe.